people say, okay, is AI rebuilding finance, or we are just patching all systems?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. What we've seen is financial institutions have huge back office operations, right? So, and there's a good reason for this. Every person's finance is hyper-personalized, most often out of distribution in terms of like workflows. So banks end up having specialist workflows, specialist teams that pass tickets across each other. This creates what we call a handoff tax. Every time you get in touch with your bank, they pass you on from one team to another. There's delays, there's context being lost. And where we see AI making a huge change is not removing specialization. Specialization is needed. You have KYC experts, you have money laundering experts, lending experts, that's all needed. But there is a change in the unit of work. There's a change from tickets being passed around to having a customer level case where AI agents are the specialists. They're sharing context, they're sharing memory, and they're passing this information around between them by eliminating the handoff tax. So it is essentially being reinvented from the back office to the front office.
I think companies that have been successful in sort of fintech and finance over the last, call it kind of decade and a half, have sort of fallen into two broad categories. One have been people trying to build large bank-like institutions, and the others have been ones that have been very focused on sort of like vertically solving one very specific kind of problem in finance. Like you see it with robo-advisors solving one problem. And I think the thing that sort of AI enables, or is enabling, is kind of, I think like each company being able to be much broader in kind of where they service. I think traditionally finance lended itself towards organizations who could have that kind of strength of balance sheet, who could build depth of operations behind the scenes in order to do more than one thing. And I think that kind of through automation, through kind of better systems of record, through kind of just being able to do more, we will see less of the kind of the success in fintech being these sort of micro kind of vertically specific products, and actually those same organizations with similar amounts of resource being able to go kind of much broader and utilize kind of the strength of distribution that they've built on one thing and actually kind of spread it much broadly. So I think it's enabling kind of much kind of larger surface area of products that are being built, simply because actually you don't need this strength of kind of operating infrastructure that historically kind of banks were very good at.
I think if I were to predict the future, one thing that we might see change with financial institutions that in the US has been happening for the past 10 or so years is some of the financial advisors that do right now sit in the bigger banks could very well go and spin up their own smaller firms. They might get frustrated with the lack of AI, or they might realize that it has actually never been easier to set up your own business in any industry. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw this decentralization of moving from the three top banks to a bunch of smaller, more AI native, more, thoughtfully curated experiences, which is something that in the US is happening very, very aggressively. For context, 13% of advisors every year from the Goldman Sachses of the world are going and setting up their own practice in order to deliver better, more thoughtful, more personalized experiences.
And I think that's one of the things that the US is ahead of Europe on, is sort of the need for the sort of much more personal relationship with the person on the other end of the phone providing the service. Yes. I think kind of in Europe, we still have a very kind of institutional mindset of I am a customer of X. And thus, sort of like, if that person leaves, that doesn't necessarily sort of dictate me leaving and kind of going with them. And I think we've seen that as a trend much more in the US than we have in Europe, where kind of the power of the institution and the power of the brand of the institution still holds a lot of weight.
There is a line between the personalization, the manipulation in the AI era, because when we speak about finance, it's about trust. So, okay, we will start with Danai with this.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of personalization in finance, people generally are more relaxed with letting someone make the decision. Like, that is how the world has worked. You've got fund managers, like, you offload the decision making to someone else. So I think naturally humans and customers are going to be quite relaxed with AI being part of that. I guess that maybe the pivot here in the behavior is Instead of, do I trust this person to manage my money and kind of give me personalized advice? The pivot is, do I understand what is this AI optimizing for? What are its constraints? And when does it stop? Does it know how to stop? So I guess the personalization, I think, element has always been there. Like humans have always interacted that way with finance. I guess it's just the mode of operation that is changing slightly, but I think humans are naturally inclined to let someone else, potentially that is less emotional and more informed, to make those decisions.
No matter how good the AI gets, the other person, when they're trusting, $2, $3, $5 million into a system, they want to know that there's a human on the other end, monitoring, supervising, checking in with them. Like, I think one thing that you said, Christian, that's really important is this idea of an accountability partner.
And I would like also to speak about Europe. As we are in Athens, okay, many analysts say Europe can't compete with the USA or China, for example. We have too many regulations, especially on fintech, okay? But I know that Europe has some milestones in the fintech industry. So I would like to ask your opinion about this. How do you feel?
Yeah, I don't think we can outspend the US on frontier models. I think it's not a controversial opinion, I hope. And then, China has their own infrastructure that is quite hard to compete with. The one thing that we do have, I guess, what is our unfair advantage is regulation. And I'm not going to argue that regulation is positive. It can be, but it can also create latency, which can kill companies. But what Europe's unfair advantage can be, if we can figure out how we can turn regulation into something that accelerates startups. So in a way where if we figure out trusted deployment in legacy institutions, which we know that's where the high AI value deployments are, they've got huge problems like energy, public services, finance, regtech, all of those domains. If we can figure out how trusted deployment works in those regulated industries, it means that we can have a lot of AI unicorns suddenly being born in Europe. But they don't need to go to the US to grow aggressively. They can be growing aggressively in Europe. And then we become the gold standard. Europe is how you do a trusted deployment in a regulated industry, and then you get instantly a global recognition across all continents because we set the standard of how that is meant to work.
We have this benefit in Europe as well, I think, of sort of this forcing function that we've always had to think very internationally immediately. Kind of our own individual single sort of countries are not large enough to sustain building huge businesses. So you immediately have to start thinking kind of cross-border and through localization, and kind of different priorities and different things matter to different people in different countries. So I think that's a huge advantage. I think kind of you build a much more robust product and organization if you have to account for those things from day one, rather than, I think, if you're in the US, like there is such a massive sort of homogenous domestic market for you to sell to, that it's very easy to kind of kick the can down the road of how do I localize and internationally expand until much, much later. So I think that's a huge plus for us as well, is sort of thinking about these things much earlier and sort of structurally building what could be more robust institutions because of it.